Which creepy urban legend turned out to be true? Story 1. When I was about 12 years old, a friend and I were playing in the woods that were known for being creepy. While building a fort, a strange man snuck up behind us and yelled at us to get off his land and never come back, yada yada. It really startled us, as we knew the land was a public area and had never been threatened by an adult before. Several years later, we found out he was an actual bank robber, wanted by the FBI for years. We were building our fort a few feet from his stash. Here's the news article about it. Story 2. I live near a lake, and there was an urban legend that there were huge lake monsters near the hydroelectric dam. Most people thought it was just some fisherman's tall tales. We all guessed it was just a twist on the classic "The One That Got Away." Turns out divers went into the water behind the dam for a routine inspection to see if there was any damage after months of heavy flooding in the area. Apparently, one of the divers got too close to what he originally thought was a large moss-covered rock boulder until it moved and tried to latch onto the diver's arm. Apparently, there are plus 200 pounds of catfish behind the dam, which thrive on the dead fish that go through the hydroelectric portion of the dam. The agitated water makes it easier for the large catfish to breathe and grow past what is commonly found in the area, and the lack of fishers, as all commercial fishing is banned for at least 1,000 meters, means these fish are truly free to grow to truly enormous sizes. Story 3. Not creepy, but in my small rural hometown, there was a rumor that a bunch of city officials, cops, teachers, business owners, etc., basically anyone a kid would see as an authority figure, had massive orgies. Obviously, as you grew up, you came to your senses, until one year when a teacher's husband stomped the absolute crap out of a local business owner in broad daylight. Turns out the legend wasn't just a legend. His wife was apparently a member of what was called the Hot Tub Club, and he wasn't invited. A good chunk of local leaders got outed as hosting orgies somewhat regularly. I'm more surprised it was kept secret as long as it was. Story 4. We had an older couple that would come into the store I worked at when I was 15. They clearly had mental health problems, and the rumor was they were siblings, and the 2 teenage girls with them were their children. About 5 years later, I'd find out someone had called the state about them, and it turns out, from what I remember, to be mostly true. The parents were apparently the result of incest, and they carried on the family tradition, as it were. I think the state removed their daughters and put them in state custody since they weren't able to take care of themselves, and I don't remember what happened to the parents. Story 5. Black Volga. In the 60s and 70s, there existed an urban legend in Poland that vampires in black limousines were kidnapping people, preferably little children. It was a tale parents told their kids, who would then tell their friends, etc. Turns out it was a rumor that was spread by the Polish secret police, who actually used black cars to kidnap people. The aim was that no one would believe someone who would report they had witnessed a kidnapping. Story 7. The Asylum lake tunnels in Kalamazoo are real. There is a small lake and wildlife area just off of WMU's campus, and for a long time, there were rumors going around that they were still there and accessible. Well, turns out that was true, and there was an old set of stairs that was partially buried that led to a walled-up tunnel entrance. A few people used hand tools and ended up breaking part of the wall down and got inside only to find the tunnels fully intact, albeit a bit damp and murky. Somehow the authorities got wind and went and sealed the entrance again, but it's still very obvious where that was if you are really looking for them. Story 8. When I was a kid, my dad would take me and my brother to High Rock. It's a neat overlook, and we could play on the rocks. It was fun, but also a little sobering, as much as things can be for kids, because a girl had died in a hang gliding accident, if I remember right. As you drive up to the parking lot for the overlook, the road continues on into the woods. We asked our dad where it went, and he told us that you'd be driving down the road, and suddenly armed guards would pop out of the woods to stop you, because there was a secret government base there. That's the case, except it isn't really a secret. It's Raven Rock, which is a nuclear bunker that can act as a remote Pentagon if the country is attacked. Cheney went there on September 11th while Bush was taken somewhere else. You will be detained if you trespass on the property. I went back to High Rock a few years ago while visiting family, and while hanging out at the overlook, a truck of teenagers showed up. They asked if I knew what was up the access road, and I told them Raven Rock and not to keep going because they'd be detained. They decided they wanted to check it out anyway. An hour later, when I left High Rock, those kids had not come back yet, so I figured they were getting their asses chewed out by a soldier. Story 9. This is a very recent and local story as it happened at a middle school that I used to attend. There was this janitor, though he actually left when I was still at the school, and substitute bus driver at our school that everyone loved. He would give all of the kids candy and show them around the areas of the school where kids weren't supposed to go, like the boiler room. I even heard that he ate dinner at a kid's house once. Even after he left the school, he would still visit, sometimes just saying hi to the kids. There were always some jokes that he liked kids, but everyone at the school loved him and thought that he was a great guy. Recently, he was arrested for having thousands of pictures and videos of child porn. Makes things pretty weird in hindsight. Story 10. I went to a university near Valley Forge, PA. It used to be a POW camp and a military hospital before the college bought the entire property for $1 in the 1960s. Since there are really only 3 universities near Valley Forge, PA, it will not be hard to deduce which college it was LOL anyways. There was a rumor that underground tunnels and all sorts of stuff were left abandoned in the abandoned sections of the college. Sure enough, it was true. We found a tunnel hatch under the carpet in our dorm room, 2 hatches on the first floor, furthest most first floor dorm room of each building. It was literally like stepping into 1945. Everything was preserved down there, and the tunnels were massive. We eventually ended up in an underground garage, where there were 4 Jeeps parked, but all the tires had dry rotted. We realized this was actually beneath our soccer field. Anyways, the tunnels lead to the cafeteria, the admin building, every dorm, and then an old abandoned section of our campus that we had no way of entering. We soon realized this was the hospital morgue. When we got out of the tunnels and walked the floor, it was still like 1945. All the hospital beds were still there. The surgical curtains were still there. Hell, even the tools, like the scalpel, saw, pliers, etc., were still on their trays. It was like everyone all of a sudden up and left, and nothing had been moved since then. The morgue still had its slabs, and sometimes we would dare each other to slide in there for a period of time. But yeah, it was an urban legend on campus until the 3 of us decided to risk expulsion to see if it was true, and it was. Story 11. The man that worked in a law firm on the 24th story of a building. As a running gag, he would tell everyone that the windows in the building were unbreakable, then proceed to run at one of them with full force. Once, he did it and the glass didn't break, but the window popped out of the frame, and he fell to his death 24 stories. I saw this on an urban legend show when I was a kid, but found out later that this really happened in my city, Toronto, Canada. My boyfriend works in the same building, and rumor has it that the man landed on a concrete bench at concourse level. A woman and her child had just been sitting there minutes before his fatal plunge. Story 12. Freddy Krueger is based on a real story. Hear me out. There's a small ethnic group local to Southeast Asia, the Hmong people. They've been oppressed for years by various countries, so they fought with the US during the Vietnam Civil War. As you know, we lost, and the North Vietnamese were gearing up to kill the Hmong people who had fought for the Southern Vietnamese. So the US airlifted a bunch of Hmong families to the US, primarily in California and Minnesota. One of the recent immigrants was a young man. He was perfectly healthy, but suddenly died in his sleep. No one knew how he died. It's guessed it was a heart attack, but an autopsy wasn't done. This sent a panic throughout the community. There is a Hmong legend of a spirit that enters your dreams and kills you. Hmong people were terrified. They were also in a new community without access to some old traditions to protect them. Young men started staying awake, trying to avoid the monster. They downed caffeine. They were actually scared enough that it caused stress to their hearts, and they died. Eventually, 117 men died from Hmong sleeping sickness. Story 13. This is, thankfully, a somewhat more light-hearted urban legend than a lot of the posted ones so far. So, I'd heard several times from friends and whatnot hearsay tales about this creepy, near-mythical shoelicker who resided in the Tampa area. Apparently, this dude would walk up to people in public spaces and would ask them about their shoes and ask to see the bottoms of them, and would then drop and do his best to lick the bottoms of the shoes before the person could step back down. Naturally, I thought that was just way too weird, and there was no way this wasn't just people making up some crappy story. Then I ran into the guy at a taco truck, skinny dude with longish hair, probably homeless from how he was dressed. Could have been 18, could have been 30. Walks up as I'm waiting for what turns out to have been the best taco I've ever had in my existence, a cochinita pibil for the curious, and asks about the shoes I'm wearing. I'd just finished performing and was still wearing some Doc Marten boots and was more than a little soused. He asks if he can see the treads or something like that. I'm all confused and am like, sure, why not? And he drops to the floor, grabs my boot, and starts licking away at the sole. I yelled at the dude, sort of kicked him, and he scampered off. Weirdest interaction ever. Story 14. There were abandoned tunnels below my town. A large part used to be a self-sustaining mental institution covering several square miles. Everyone talked about them, but no one ever talked about actually being in them. Went spelunking in the woods and found an old maintenance shack. There was a basement that was flooded. Went back a couple of years later when there was a bad drought. The basement has a rusted door leading into said tunnels. Nothing special, and no escaped crazy people. Story 15. Where I live, there was a legend about a child and pet-eating monster on the east side of town. We called it the Beast from the East. One child was reported missing, and multiple pets as well. There was even a mangled-up deer found just out on the train tracks in that area. And the trains no longer use that track / it was blocked off, so a train couldn't have run over the deer. There were coyotes out in the woods around town, some, lynx, and maybe even wolverines, so most people assumed those animals were coming into town to follow the deer that would herd there every fall spring and just pick off pets because they were easy prey if not fenced in properly. Well, a few years ago, a trapper set up their traps to possibly catch some of these animals for fur and help reduce the amount of missing pets. He ended up snaring a mountain lion. Mountain lions should not exist this far east in Canada as they are considered extinct on the eastern side of Canada, and we are only a few hundred, maybe 200, 300 miles from Manitoba. Most lions stick close to the Alberta side if they are anywhere in Saskatchewan. So the beast from the east was real, although it was just an elusive big cat. We knew there was an actual monster living near town, even though law enforcement, the forest rangers, kept saying otherwise. Story 16. There's an urban legend about a thief stealing a suitcase containing a dead dog. In the 70s, my crazy artist aunt and uncle lived in Manhattan, and their German shepherd died. Having the city come to dispose of the dog was expensive, but lugging it up to the animal control office in the Bronx was cheaper. So they folded up the 50-plus pounds dog into a suitcase and headed for the subway. Except my uncle set down the heavy suitcase at a crosswalk while they waited for the light, and a couple of kids ran by and snatched it. My uncle gave chase, but obese alcoholics don't get far in New York in the summer. For years they laughed, speculating about what those kids said when they opened the luggage. And I wonder, again and again, are they the source of that tale? Story 17. In the small town I'm from, there was one homeless guy. He technically lived with his mother, but wasn't there much. His nickname was Sweet Pea. He was a big dude, and of course developmentally disabled. He used to wander the town at night, totally harmless, but there's always that, better watch it or Sweet Pea will get you. Well, while he was wandering, he used to go around to all the gas stations and collect the last little bit of oil left in all the oil cans in the trash. Everyone joked that he was actually rich from selling that oil. Well, when his mom died, he went to clean her house out, and he had 10 55-gallon drums of oil in his garage. He was selling it, and that's how they survived financially. Story 19. Not creepy, but a fun little anecdote. I lived in Madagascar for a while to do mission work and kinda get to know the culture of the local residents. I was asking people through a translator about their local myths and legends, and I was told about the Vazimba, a powerful sorcerer creature that can bless or curse people. He's much smaller than a normal man, but very agile, and he's invisible to everyone except the Malagasy people. Essentially, a leprechaun. I asked around, and all the other Americans confirmed that it was a popular myth. I kept asking around about the Vazimba because I found it interesting, and even talked to some people who said they had actually seen and talked to him. Then one guy told us he lived under the train station in the town. Then one day we saw him. It was a little person, and he actually lived in a hollowed den under the train station. The Malagasy were amazed that I could actually see him. He was very elusive, and I only caught a glimpse of him once, but it was cool to see the truth behind the legend. Story 20. Throwaway, since I tell this story, IRL. There was an urban legend at my high school that one of the janitors quit because he saw a set of bloody footprints down the hallway. My bad, that was me. One day, I was staying late to complete a class project and dropped a heavy glass pane on my toe. It left a huge gash that I couldn't get to stop bleeding. Now, my school was the kind of place where having a shoe full of blood would get you a week's detention instead of a hospital visit, so I made sure to check around before I limped home to bandage myself up. Our high school was a rectangle with a sunken library in the middle, so we had hallways that framed it. I was at one corner, and at the other end was the janitor finishing up mopping the hallway. As soon as he turned the corner, I took off my shoes and socks. Since they were so full of blood, I couldn't properly walk, and walked down the hallway and out the door. This left a perfect trail of bloody footprints all the way until the hallway dried out, which happened to be exactly where the exit door was. As the rest of the story goes, he turned around when he heard the door close and found a trail of bloody footprints down the hallway with no one there to take responsibility. Dude quit on the spot. Sorry to freak you out, janitor, but ghosts aren't real, or at least don't do that. Story 21. The legend. Soldier A, U.S. Army, late 80s or early 90s, NLT 1994, is married to wife A, who is cheating with Soldier B. Wife A is pregnant and goes to hospital to have a baby. After the baby is delivered, and believing it to be Soldier B's baby, Soldier A leaves the hospital and goes somewhere on post. Soldier A sees Soldier B in a payphone booth, actually talking to wife A, confronts him, kills him, cuts off his head, stuffs the severed head into a bag, and returns to the hospital. Upon return, Soldier A presents wife A with Soldier B's head, saying something about, "Here's the father," or something, surrenders himself to the police, later sentenced to a couple of decades in prison. Really happened. Story 22. In most cases, there is little truth to the legend. At my old high school, there are more than a few. Everyone told this story of this ghostly baseball player that you could see on the field sometimes. Fun tea context, my graduating class was about 120 people, so it's a pretty small school, and all the buildings are facing the baseball field. This made it extra creepy because you were always so close to the ghost. The story was that he got killed because a pitcher threw an insane fastball that hit him in the chest. Supposedly, it was so hard that it went into his chest, essentially replacing his heart. I never believed it. I asked my dad about it. He also graduated from that school, and he said he had a teacher that actually was there when it happened. I also found some newspapers to prove the teacher's story. Don't know where they are now. The real story is the guy got hit in the chest and it ruptured his heart due to a pre-existing heart issue that no one knew about before. He died on first base. Story 23. There was a teacher at my high school who had been teaching there since my best friend's older brother used to attend years previous. There were whispers that she always had a favorite senior guy every year and would eventually sleep with them. Had that teacher for 3 years, and I could definitely see where the legend came from. Years after I graduated, it came out that it was true after one of her victims, a guy I somewhat knew, went to his parents, who then called the police. While the investigation was ongoing, the school board quietly moved her to another school. She was eventually found guilty and lost her husband and kids. Only one dude ever spoke, so who knows how long this went on. Story 24. Whispering Monkey People. One of the countries in Southeast Asia, can't remember which one, had a myth about monkey people who would talk in soft voices and kidnap people. In the last decade, some archaeologists uncovered an offshoot of proto-humans that coexisted with Homo sapiens in that area for several thousand years. Based on their physiology, there was something about their throat or mouth that would have made them only able to whisper. Story 25. I'm not sure if this counts, but in my high school, we used to find animal bones on the football field, and they were always burned. We assumed it was some deranged high schoolers trying to scare the public or something stupid like that. The bones were mostly dog and cat bones. What we learned was much scarier. My high school was a private Christian school. Well, it turns out the bones were from the occult meeting to have rituals on our fields and curse the school. The animals they burned were also people's pets that they stole in the middle of the night. We learned this because the cops hid one night to see who was doing this over and over. Story 26. There is a local legend about a figure known as the Bunny Man, supposedly the ghost of an escaped insane asylum patient who haunts a particular bridge. It is, as you can imagine, almost entirely horse crap. However, there is one report, allegedly I haven't done a whole lot of looking, of two people who were assaulted in the area by a man, wielding an axe, and wearing what they described as a bunny costume that many people say was more likely to be clan robes. I told a friend who was terrified of the Bunny Man, and she said, I think I'd take the murderous ghost over the murderous racists. So I guess maybe the legend is less scary than the truth. Story 27. Not entirely proven true, but still really interesting, is the Westall UFO encounter in 1966. Over 200 people saw a UFO land right in front of them in plain daylight. Almost everyone who witnessed had the same description of the craft. One girl became hysterical at the sight, and later that day, one of her best friends went to go see her at her house. She had been to many times previously, only to find another family living there entirely, and the new mother saying she had never heard of said girl. The military immediately showed up and confiscated all pictures of the event and told students not to talk about it. Easily one of the oddest, terrifying, and just plain confusing events I've ever heard of.